Thank you so much. If you'll find your seat. Thank you so much for being here this morning. A lot of folks were kind of hanging around to see the kiddos, and they already heard the sermon, so I don't think they would put themselves through hearing it a second time in the same morning like I have to, or Dwayne. It was last winter, 2017. We had a Super Bowl party here at the church for the lineman students. There clearly were two camps. There were the New England Yankees, and of course they were for the Patriots. And then there were the good old Southern boys, and of course we were cheering for the Falcons. There was a good crowd, highly anticipated dinner and game. At halftime, the Southern boys left with confidence. The New England Yankees left because they got tired of hearing the Southern boys' mouth. And we know how it turned out. The moral of the story, of course, is it's not how you start, it's how you finish. I heard that statement twice this week in the sporting world. Once it had to do with an individual who started strong and then faded to a near last place finish. And another had to do with a team that took a big lead only to either fold up or just to be beaten by a better team. But I would bet if you're listening for it probably 100 times a year, you're going to hear, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. You know, I look around at people, and most of you I know very well, most of you, or a lot of you. We're here today because we have some love and appreciation for the Lord. We're here today because we want to make a difference in somebody's life. We're here today because worshiping God is incredibly important to us. But it's not where we are today. It's how we're going to finish. This morning I'm going to be in Hebrews chapter 4, but I'll give you a heads up. It's just one verse. So if you want to go to Hebrews 4, and I'll also give you another heads up, it's going to be a few minutes before I get there. Because what I want to do is kind of take us through a little bit of the Old Testament and look at a few people and see how they started and how they finished. Now, if you're visiting with us, the sermon title, of course, is it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Or you could say a good start doesn't guarantee a happy ending. And we're studying a sermon that was preached. Somebody wrote it down. And it's a sermon that's primarily going to Jews who have accepted Christ in the first century. And now they're struggling with things like, I'm losing my job, I'm losing my home, I'm losing my friendships. I'm not sure that this is the right way I need to be going. They're kind of having what we call in modern day society a crisis of faith. They're trying to figure out if they want to hang in there with Christ or go back to their old way of life. Well, let's face it, we're not first century Jews, and you may not think it applies to us. But I think it applies to every one of us. Because we've all started down a road somewhere, and we all are going to have to make a decision. Are we going to hang in there and finish strong? Or are we going to kind of fade out? I've always thought to understand Hebrews, you got to understand the Old Testament, which is probably why I don't like preaching Hebrews. A lot of work. A lot of work to understand the Old Testament. But as I was thinking about this idea of a strong finish and thinking of the idea that just because we have a great start, it doesn't mean we're going to finish strong, I started thinking about some Old Testament people. And I want to just share a few of them. And I'm not going to have time to read the verses. I'm hoping you'll do homework. Remember what I tell you about preachers, right? We can lie. We can get things wrong. Do not trust us. Do not. Go ahead and listen to me since you're here. You might as well. But don't trust me. Study on your own and figure it out yourself. But I was thinking about some Old Testament names, people that most of you will probably recognize, of people who had a great start. Here's what, I'm going to mention 4 names in a few minutes, just kind of bang, bang, bang. Here's what they have in common. They had a great start. And then they faded. I can't even start the list without talking about King Solomon. Wow, what a guy. He's a young man. He becomes king. He's inexperienced. He doesn't know what he's doing. It's a big job. His dad left him big shoes to fill. God appears to him, and God says, "What can I do for you? What would you like for me to do for you?" And Solomon says one of the most incredible things of anything he could ask God for. He said, "I want wisdom to lead your people well." What a beautiful thing to ask God for. And not only did God give him wisdom, but God gave him riches. God gave him fame. I mean, the known world around him would come to hear his judgments. He was that wise. Great start. But concerning Solomon, we read in 1 Kings 11, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods. And his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God as the heart of his father had been. Without getting into details, Solomon had a woman problem. Solomon had women problem. And he does what every good red-blooded man who's henpecked does. "Hey, baby, I'd like an idol." "Sure, you got it." "I want to worship my God." "You got it." And we read that Solomon would end with his heart not fully devoted to God, as David's had been. Think about that. Great king, blessed by God, ending not well. We read of King Uzziah in 2 Chronicles. If you care to do your homework, here's what you're going to discover. He was 16 years old when he became king. He was a builder. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He sought God. He was victorious in war. He built towers. He was a godly king. He had a well-equipped army. Everything was going well. He's a classic case of pride goes before the fall. See, Uzziah decided to do something that no king was permitted to do, or no one but the priest. He was going to go into the temple. He starts in, he's confronted by the priest. He gets angry with them. Next thing you know, he breaks out in some sort of leprosy, some sort of skin disease. He's ready to get out of there by then. But we're told, obviously in the culture of that day, and even in some parts of the world today, he's separated from everybody else. His son kind of is like ad hoc king or something. But here's how we're told that he finished. In 2 Chronicles 26, Uzziah rested with his ancestors and was buried near them in a cemetery that belonged to the kings, for the people said he had leprosy. Oh, you'd think you could say he was a great builder. You think they might say he had a great army. You think they might say, boy, he built some towers. Look at all of his accomplishments. Can you imagine walking up on the tombstone? He had leprosy. What a sad way to finish. In 2 Chronicles 14, 15, and 16, we read about King Asa. We read that he was a good king. He did right in the eyes of the Lord. He removed idols. He commanded the people to seek the Lord. God gave him peace. Great start. You would want to be probably under his reign. He called on the Lord. He relied on the Lord. But we read that in the 26th year of his reign, he disobeys God. God sends a seer. He acts foolishly. He gets angry. He gets sick. Keep in mind, man, I'm taking a long story. I feel like I'm Gary Calloway this morning trying to preach the whole Bible in one setting. Just can't do it. But he gets sick. And here's what we read about him in 1 Kings 16. Though his disease was severe, even in his illness, he did not seek help from the Lord, but only from physicians. It seems to me from what I read, he died bitter and mad at God and angry at everybody. What a horrible way to go. What a horrible way to end. One final Old Testament example is a king I love, Hezekiah. What an amazing guy. We read that he was 25 years old when he became king. We read that he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He opened the doors to the temple. He brought in priests and Levites to purify the temple. He ordered the sacrifices to God. They celebrated the Passover. He was good. He was so godly. He was victorious in battle. But in the course of time, he became sick. And you got to really dig deep for this one. He prayed that God would extend his life. God answered him. Anybody in here ever felt like your life's been extended because of an answered prayer? It says in 2 Chronicles 32, but Hezekiah's heart was proud, and he did not respond to the kindness shown him. In 15 extra years, I feel like he made 2 horrible blunders. One, he decided to have a kid. Manasseh. You read about him. He was the most wicked king Judah ever had. And he decided to show the Babylonians all of his treasures. Isaiah would tell him that's a big mistake. More about that in a minute. So I looked in the mirror this morning at somebody who's getting older. I look at you and let's face it, you're getting older. How are we going to finish? The good news is if you've got a rotten start, that really doesn't matter. If you've got a great start, if you've done everything pretty good, you're pretty holy, I mean, you haven't messed up too bad, I'm sorry for you because it really matters how you finish. So now, back to this transcribed sermon. We read last week where there was a generation of Jews wandering around in the wilderness and they couldn't enter into the promised rest, the promised land, because of their unbelief. Can you imagine that? Walking through the Red Sea, having manna come down from heaven, having God provide your needs, and not being able to enter into the time of the place of rest because of your disbelief. I'm not making a salvation sermon out of this because salvation is not mentioned. I don't want to go there, frankly. But we are on a journey. God has a place for us where we experience His greatest blessings. And I think that's a place of total obedience, total submission, total surrender, where we just give it to Him. We're on that journey. How will we finish? In Hebrews chapter 4, verse 1, it says, therefore, again, I always say, why is it therefore? Therefore, because we've been reading about a generation who didn't make it because of disbelief. We've been reading that God has blessings for all of us. We've been reading about what God wants to do in our lives. Therefore, since we have the promise, His rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. Don't give up. Don't quit. Stay true to what God's calling you to do. Don't come to me at 80 years old and say, I'm tired, I got to give up. If you happen to be exactly 80, no offense intended. Come to me and say, I want to help some younger people. I want to be an example for some younger people. I want to help them to grow. I want to turn over some of my ministry to them, but I want to help them. I want them to see an example of someone who will not quit, because this promise still stands, and I'm not going to be happy just stopping short of what God has for me. I want to finish the race. I want to be what God has called me to be. So I was thinking about the fact, let's face it, more people quit than stay true. So what causes our hearts to harden? What causes our faith to fold up? What causes us to quit? A few things this morning. First thing is this: when we decide God's way won't work. You ever been there? Sadly, there are times when we focus on short-term results. Take me, for instance. I decided this week I would work on my physique. I wore the stripes just so you could clearly see my physique. You got it? Everybody got a picture? I mean, I could take the shirt off, but I won't. Here's what I decided I would do this week. I realized last Sunday when I left here, as I collapsed in the recliner, I'm out of shape. Okay? So I decided that Monday and Tuesday I would exercise. Wednesday and Thursday I would eat right. And by Sunday I'd be ready to run a marathon. I'm very disappointed with the results. I thought for sure I would be there by today. Or how about this? How about if I told you that when my kids were like 3 and 1 year old, that Teresa bought me a big T-shirt that said "World's Greatest Dad," and the kids had the little mini versions, and we all wore around "World's Greatest Dad" because for about 3 years I was awesome, and then I just don't care anymore. It wouldn't make any sense to any of us. We understand it physically, but we have to understand spiritually that there's a long-term plan that God has, and if we expect everything to work day by day or night by night or 1 week at a time, we're going to give up because we're going to make a decision that God's way just won't work. And I see it over and over and over again, and we end up making a decision to start trying to do it our way. I think tying into when we decide God's way won't work is when we decide God's way just doesn't make sense. Have you ever thought in your mind, if I was God, I wouldn't do that? That's why we're not God. I've thought that a lot, and I realized why God didn't make me God. I still wouldn't mind the job, but He's not going to give it to me. And you hear me say these kind of things all the time, but just think about it. God tells us when we're financially hurting to be generous. That makes no sense. God tells us to trust Him every day and He'll take care of us. That makes no sense. God tells us to keep on going when we don't feel like we can go anymore. That makes no sense. God tells us to love people who hate us and to bless people who curse us and to be kind to people who harm us. None of that makes any sense. And so many people just walk away because it just doesn't make any sense. And yet time and time and time again, we've seen it work, right? Time and time again, we have seen that if we obey God in a weird way, it works. It might just mean we have peace within ourselves, but it works. Why do we walk away? Well, let me give you some verses in Isaiah. It says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." We quit on God because we think God's way won't work, and we're not God, and every time we try it our way, it just messes everything up, doesn't it? Eventually, it messes up. Third, sometimes we'll quit on God because I think we're afraid that we're going to miss something. To me, this is classic Adam and Eve. This is classic Eddie. You've heard me say it many, many times, but the best way to assure that I will touch your wall is for you to tell me you've just painted it and it's wet. If I ever come into your house and you've just painted, do not tell me. Because if it is wet, I'm going to see if you really painted it. The best way to get me to cross a line is for somebody to put something up that says do not cross. Especially that stupid yellow tape that anybody can knock down. If you don't want me to cross something, put up a concrete wall where I can't cross it. If there's yellow tape, I'm at least sticking a foot under. We were in Romania and we went to this little synagogue and Robert was with us and I don't know if Steve was there. Anyway, there's several from the church. And the priest was going on about, unless you're a priest, you can't cross this line. And he was back there. So Robert knew what I was going to do. Here I go. I got my toes across that line. Yeah. I think with Adam and Eve, they started looking at that tree. They're like, man, we've got so much stuff, but there's something over here we can't have. Maybe God put up the yellow tape. How many times have we quit on God because we're afraid we're going to miss something? God has a way for us to live, but if we live that way, we're going to miss it. If we're single and we obey God, we're missing so much. If we're married and we obey God, we're missing so much. I'm just afraid I'm going to miss something. I think we might quit on God because we think our situation is unique. Ever thought this? Those rules God gave, they're pretty good and they apply to you, but they don't apply to me in this case because you just don't know my situation. If you were in my shoes, oh no, you just don't understand. And how we tie into that is every time when I start to disobey God, I can always work myself into this statement. Tell me if you've ever used it. I've got peace about it. What a great statement. I can deceive myself into thinking that what I'm doing is absolutely right because I've got a peace about it. Newsflash. We've got to be worried about God's peace about it more so than my peace about it. I can talk myself into something. God is God and God hasn't changed, so we need to be worried about if God's at peace about it. But sometimes we think our situation is unique. I think sometimes we give up on God when we suffer from spiritual amnesia. You ever forgotten what God has done for you? This morning, did you happen to forget? As the bones started creaking, and it wasn't quite as easy to get to church as it was 40 years ago, and you realize you're never going to jump out of bed again, now just roll over and hope to get out? Yeah. I mean, that's what we got to look forward to. And in spite of all the pills, eventually it's going to get worse. Sorry. Sometimes we're just in this area, we're just so successful. We have everything going our way. We've been blessed by God and we have this stuff. We have arrived. We have it. We forget who gave it to us. In Deuteronomy 6, starting at verse 10, listen to these words. When the Lord your God brings you into the land He swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you a land with large, flourishing cities you did not build, houses filled with all kind of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant, then when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. He's speaking to the generation that's going in. And now he says, be very careful because you're going to be blessed by God. Be very careful not to forget that it's God. Some of us in here that used to pray about having our mortgage paid off, how many times have we thanked God that the mortgage is now paid off? Some of us in here used to pray, God, just get me to retirement. How many times have we thanked God that we are retired? Some of us in here years and years ago who used to pray, oh, just keep Social Security afloat. When's the last time you thanked God that the check made it to the bank? It's so easy. There is a cure for spiritual amnesia, but it's just so hard. In 1 Thessalonians 5, it says, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. How can I keep reminding myself that God has given me all this stuff? Give thanks. How often do I gripe? The roof leaks. Y'all think I've lost my mind if I'm running around the house praising God because the roof leaks. The other day when I went like 25 miles out of my way because the freeway was stopped as I was cruising through beautiful Chattanooga Valley, do you think I was praising God? Oh, thank you, Jesus. I'm so glad this freeway is backed up. In all things, give thanks. For God, for people. Here's how a church can really flourish, and here's how a church can really decay. If we look around at each other and give thanks for everybody. Instead of looking at what we don't have, look at what we do have. Instead of looking at what we can't do, look at what we can do. Instead of looking at everybody's failures, let's look at what everybody can do and the abilities we all have to serve God together. But so many times we'll just sit and take God for granted. God puts us all together so we can serve Him. Beautiful. But we just got to look at each other and realize that. One final thing. And this one is so convicting to me. I hate it when I convict myself over a sermon. But one last big reason I think we quit is when we're not concerned about those who will follow us. And I'm so sorry, y'all. I joke so much about 10,000 years from now I could care less. I would go to the altar, but I'm not giving a call. I'm just apologizing. And I know you're thinking, 10,000 years? Who cares if a meteor hits? Okay, what if it's 1,000 years? What if it's 100 years? What if it's 50 years? 10,000 years from now, who cares if Trenton First Baptist is here? None of us will be here. Do we care if it's here 50 years from now? Do we care if it's here 20 years from now? Do we care? It's so easy not to care if it doesn't impact us. And I want to go back briefly to the Hezekiah story. Hezekiah has shown the treasures to the Babylonians. Isaiah the prophet comes, and this is a loose paraphrase. I'm sure he didn't talk this way. King, you've messed up. There's going to come a time when the Babylonians are going to come in and sweep you away, sweep your ancestors, sweep your family away. If you read in Isaiah, what you're going to read is that Isaiah tells Hezekiah that at some point in the future, your descendants, your own flesh and blood will be taken away and made eunuchs, castrated males to serve the king in Babylon. One of the saddest responses ever is in Isaiah 39:8. Isaiah responds to Hezekiah, "The word of the Lord you have spoken is good." For he thought, there will be peace and security in my lifetime. So what if it might be my great-grandkids? So what if it might be 300? Grandkids being eunuchs in Babylon? Who cares? It's okay in my lifetime. Are we ever guilty of that feeling? Now, we wouldn't say it quite that harshly. But are we ever guilty of the fact that ministries are going to die if we don't take time to train up young people to do them? Are we ever guilty of the truth that young people need encouragement? I mean, are we ever guilty of the truth that we just need to start letting go and building up younger people and helping them to learn how to take over, and that it's not really about us, it's all about God? Do we ever lose sight of that? It's not surprising that the disciples said to Jesus, and again paraphrasing, "Get the kids away from here." Kids are a nuisance. They're annoying. I called them up to sit with me on the stage on Friday. Pam sent me a picture. Thank you, Pam. And you know what? 80% of them wasn't even paying attention. Very humbling. They were moving around, making noise, wearing hats in church. Didn't even have their Bibles with them. I can see why the disciples were so agitated. But those are the people we need to be grabbing and helping and praying for and encouraging. And when we see them run out of children's church, we should be happy to see them. I just ask you to contrast David with Hezekiah. And forgive me for going through the whole Old Testament. Next time Gary speaks, you'll be able to follow him much better, I think. God says to David, "You're not going to build my temple." You read what David did to get his son ready to build that temple. Because he had a love for God, he had a love for his son, he had a love for his nation. And we need to spend time giving things up and letting younger people take over and encouraging them. And let them see we are not going to quit. Usually when I say old people, it's time to, okay, fine, I'm happy, I'm tired, I'm worn out, not going to do it anymore. No. We need to come right along beside of them and walk with them every inch of the way and work harder than we've ever worked before so that they can see an example of people who refuse to quit. It's on your outline, but just real quickly, just some thoughts about guaranteeing a strong finish. Obey God. Do not be ruled by emotions. How many times have we wanted to quit because of emotions? Do things God's way. Remember, God will reward the faithful in the life to come. You know, we all believe God, our goal is to hear God say, "Well done," right? "Well done, good and faithful servant." Are we all for that? Could we vote? Yes? So that must mean we believe God might say, "Not so well done, sorry and lazy servant." Third, press on. Don't look back. Keep on running the race. And fourth, always remember it's about God and it's about others. If you're right with God, if you've been saved, if you're holy in God's sight, run the race and finish. If you're not, give your life to Jesus today and begin a walk with Him. If you have given your life to Jesus, make a public commitment. Be baptized. But let's all of us get busy running a race to finish. I would like somebody to say about me, I finished stronger than I started. I certainly don't want to coast. I don't want to coast. I do care. I just got to start acting like it. Let's make a commitment to do that. I'm going to close in a weird way with an introduction. Boy, he ties into the sermon so well. My stepbrother is here. David, would you mind waving? I know you work there up there around Times Square, and I didn't think you'd mind waving to the crowd probably. I don't see David much. I don't talk to him much, but one thing I love about him, and I hope he don't mind me saying, I'm guessing early 80s? 82. That son of a gun's always doing something. Every time I call him, he's got some new project. You'd think, well, I'm 82 now. I'm just going to sit here in my apartment and die. No. He's always doing something. What a beautiful testimony. Thank you, David, for always doing something. Let's make that our commitment. We're not giving up. we're not giving up. We're pressing on. And we're going to make a difference. It may or may not have been said, but remember,